Ugh. Are we recording? Yeah, okay. I feel very called and very convicted to share, as a Christian woman, my journey with movement, my journey with mental illness and movement. I became a born-again believer about 5 years ago, and I didn't even know that was possible. I didn't even know there was a God, and I think in my heart I did. You know, the scriptures say that eternity is written on man's heart, and we all know we can tell. I tried really hard to say that I was atheist because I felt very forsaken by God. And I just could never, ever truly in my heart deny that there was just something so mysterious about something unseen in life, and that there had to be more to life than just the motions, the grind, the pain, and then death. There had to be something bigger. So, today, I'm going to share with you my journey of movement and healing from dissociation with movement. So movement has been part of my life since I was very young. And I mean movement that's outside of just moving through life. I did dance at a very young age, and then when I stopped doing dance outside of my home, I would often crank up the music and just dance at home. And dancing was something that I did to pass time, to express my emotions, to express my anger, to express my sorrow, to seek for joy. Dancing was something that was just really always part of me. To this day, at almost 27, I will still turn on music and dance because I know how incredible it is, mind, body, soul. After I did dance, I did do some sports. In middle school, I started playing volleyball. This was my first experience with really starting to push my body and do movement that wasn't just expressive and fun, but that built endurance and stamina and strength. As that progressed, I started going to the gym. I started doing martial arts very briefly. I started to take volleyball kind of seriously, but never seriously enough to be any good at it. And then I studied abroad when I was younger, and this introduced me to being able to ice skate. So when I was ice skating, now I was working on a different skill of fluidity and balance and pushing through pain in a whole different way, because ice skates, they break you down too. Then I got into musical theater, and this is when movement became more about presentation. In musical theater, there was dance, and there was also applying the voice to it, and breath, and singing, and storytelling, and it was kind of like dancing and kind of like athletics, but it just had this new level to it, this movement for expression and storytelling and presence, and it was awesome. I loved it. I really loved it, actually. I decided to study theater in college, and I did not pursue performance, but instead pursued children's theater. In that, I still had to take acting classes. In my acting classes, when I experienced movement for the actor and becoming very aware of the body. In this movement, it was very much so about experiencing what is the body telling you? What emotions are hidden inside? What can we allow to move through us, through acting? It was a very different experience. When you hear the story told in that light, it sounds very beautiful. But I want to hold the phone and talk about the mental health behind this movement that was actually present. When I was 21 years old, I got diagnosed with dissociation, particularly a dissociation disorder. Dissociation is a survival tactic that our mind uses when we are faced with trauma. There are 3 different definitions of dissociation right here. The first definition is the act of disconnecting or separating, or the state of being disconnected. The chemistry definition is the splitting of a molecule into smaller molecule or atoms or ions, especially by a reversible process. The psychiatric definition of it is separation of some aspects of mental functioning from conscious awareness, leading to a degree of mental dysfunction or to mental conditions, including dissociative identity disorder. This is where it becomes relevant that I am Christian and that I believe in Yahweh, I believe in Jesus, I believe in the Messiah, the Lord, the God, the Creator, the divine. There's so many different names you can use to just state God. But I particularly believe in Yahweh. I am that I am, the God that came to Moses in the burning bush, and the God that manifested into mankind as Jesus Christ, died on the cross, rose again, When I was 21 years old, I was surrounded by illness. completely on all sides. And I was working a full-time schedule while trying to maintain a full-time schedule in school and lying to myself about how hard it was while also being in a relationship with a young gentleman who I should have never been in a relationship with. We're just laying it all out on the table. In this time, I had a particular night that I experienced my soul cry out, and I didn't even really know what that meant. I had never read the Bible. I had never experienced this level of darkness and brokenness. Part of the reason it was at such an intense extreme was because I was starting to become aware of how bad the darkness was. I was starting to realize I was at rock bottom. And my soul cried out and asked, why am I in so much pain? And something that happens with dissociation is we have a tendency to inflict pain upon ourselves when we are in a dissociated state. I will talk more about that later. In this moment when my soul cried out, there was an answer. And there was a presence in my room that I had never experienced before. And maybe I had seen it or experienced it or hoped for it in the far distance, but I had never experienced it paying attention to me. That mystery of the universe that seems to hold everything together and to make miracles happen. And this presence came into my room and spoke to me and told me the reason that I was in pain was because of trauma. And it gave me this timeline in my mind of every single traumatic incident that had stacked on top of each other and had inflicted survival tendencies out of me, which caused me to lock into dissociation. When this presence left, I can only describe it as it leaving a sparkle of hope in the atmosphere around me. The very next day, I went to my university advisor and I told her, I have this trauma from my childhood. It is surfacing up. I can't focus. I'm falling apart. I'm sick. I don't know what to do. She immediately that afternoon got me into a therapist at the university clinic. If you know anything about mental health in the United States and on university campuses, it is very difficult to get into these clinics in any short amount of time. I think the severity of what I was expressing being the cause for my need for help pushed me through the front of the line, and God, honestly. My university even gave me accommodations across all my classes. Like my University of Northern Iowa, really stepped up and took care of me. And because I had this support of people doing that, it was like a launch pad. It was like I was like catapulted into my healing journey, which is why I emphasize so intensely on my channel. You need a community. We need a community. You can't heal alone. And that is part of the motivation I have for creating this channel. You're not alone in healing. Please don't isolate yourself. That was a tangent. Back into it. I went to this therapist and I poured out for the very first time all that had been poisoning me inside of me and told her of my pain and my grief and what was going on. That week, my entire life course changed. In this season, I was diagnosed with what I tried to jokingly call my big three, and that is PTSD, dissociation disorder, sensory sensitivity. When I realized the reason that I was approaching my life in a manner that I hated was because of healable trauma and sickness, something inside of me flipped a switch. The parts of me that were very determined to study, graduate, build a good life, all these things that I was trying to do but weren't succeeding because my mental health was in the way, dropped all of that. I dropped everything. I no longer cared about academia. I no longer cared about people, and that sounds bad, but just trust me. I just no longer cared about any of this, and instead, all of my focus and attention came to, whoa, we gotta heal this up. We have got to heal, because if I don't heal, I am never going to live the life that I know I can live. So I showed up to my therapy sessions like I was in an office hour with my brain. The therapist was very much so a tool in the session. I can only remember one name of any of my therapists, and each one picked up where the other one left off, but I always found a therapist no matter where I was to continue doing the check-in work that I was doing. And I met with my therapist 1 hour a week for 2 years, the different therapists that I had. And outside of that hour, I was focusing on my healing solely, intensely, completely. This is where I learned what dissociation was. In the future, I will make a video that is dedicated to talking about what dissociation is, how it shows up in our lives, how it spins us around in our trauma and recreates the trauma. But for now, I want to talk to you about my methodology of healing it, which was a methodology being born in the moment at the season of life. Once I realized that dissociation was the separating of mental functionings and the setting apart of mind and consciousness, I realized that that must mean that I can reassociate. Remember that the chemistry definition of dissociation was to divide a molecule into smaller molecules by a reversible process. So this had been the logic in my mind. If things have fractured, if my mind has divided, then I can bring it back together. Now at this point, I had ended this semester. I had worked very intensely on my healing. I needed to go back and live with family for a summer, which was an unfortunate circumstance because family was a very triggering environment to be around. I have a video on how to heal from trauma in a triggering environment, and we can talk more about it in the future too. In this season, I started with another therapist, and what we understood was I was exhibiting symptoms of dissociative identity disorder. So I'm going to share the Google definition, and then I'm going to share with you what I disagree with about the Google definition. And I think that it can break some misunderstandings that are trapping people in this disorder, okay? So hang in with me. The Google definition of dissociation identity disorder is a mental condition characterized by the existence of two or more different personality states with distinct behavior, memory, and cognition in one individual. When I say that I was experiencing symptoms of that, I'm not exaggerating. When I started working with this therapist, I started to experience my mind getting louder and crowded. And it was a very intense thing. I came to this therapist and I was like, am I schizophrenic? What's going on? And she was like, hang on. And we talked about the mind having different parts that develop due to dissociation at different developmental stages. Now, my dissociation distinctly started when I was around the age of 11, but as we dove into therapy, we saw that there was reason for me to already have dissociative tendencies as a response to my childhood environment that was intensified once I was 11 and a particular trauma happened. My understanding is that dissociative identity disorder is not something we are born with. It is something that develops out of PTSD, and it particularly develops in women who experience sexual trauma and young youth ages, because the mind is developing, and when the mind is developing and it experiences dissociation, it causes gaps in the coding of the mind. Just think about that symbolically for a second. When I say it causes gaps in the coding of the mind, think about a computer program existing in your brain, all the information. When you're dissociating, there's this gap of coding that's not written. So the mind has to insert an understanding there, and then this goes off and becomes rogue coding, and it turns into a virus in the software. That's what dissociative identity disorder is more attuned to and caused by trauma that resulted in dissociation. So many people are convinced that dissociative identity disorder, which was previously called multiple personality disorder, sometimes still is, sometimes they're considered different, but they're also considered the same. So many people think that this is their default. It's not. It's not. It's really not. And I'm so intense about this right now because I went and listened to so many podcasts, so much content, so much stuff over the many years of other people with this, and I never see people talking about healing it. I only see people exasperating it, intensifying it, and validating it, and it's not the default. When my mind started to show signs of dissociative identity disorder, which in the trajectory of my healing made sense, it split off into six different distinctive personalities that all had different ages, different emotions, different thoughts, different opinions, and then me, the seventh mind in my mind, was baffled and overwhelmed by all of it. This video is getting to a point where I'm gonna need to break it up into parts. So this is the end of part 1. I'll have part 2 coming up on my next post. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. My name is Kayleigh. Hit the notification bell if you want to know right away when the next part is coming up, and I'm going to talk more about transitioning into a new style of movement that I'd never tried before, and then realizing that it wasn't quite the fit for me, even though I like the physical application but not the spiritual implications. So thank you so much for watching part 1. I'll see you for part 2.